Hello everybody, Kirby fan here for I'll be perfectly honest with you, very long overdue video. We did this exact same thing with Return to Dreamland and Triple Deluxe, so it is time to wrap up this trilogy, as it were, and rank the Planet Robobot abilities based on how good they are against all of the bosses, as is to say, a true arena tier list. Of course, we are looking at ability solos here. Once you pick an ability, you can't change. This is just to see which abilities in a solo ability run would have the best times. We are purely looking at speed here, although I will make a note of how easy or not easy it is to use an ability. As always, I've gotten my information from the Seesaw Wiki, which I will have on the screen, but I'll also have in the description. And if you'd like to see another tier list video like this, feel free to let me know in the comments. Although I will have to note that Star Allies, I'm probably not going to be able to do that one, considering we don't have very much information beyond the abilities that are really, really good. I can do a tier list video of sorts for Star Allies. I'll try to make it work if you want it, but it's not going to be like the ones that I've done for Return to Dreamland, Triple Deluxe, and now Planet Robobot. Now, there is one other thing that I want to talk about before we get started, and I'll make it as brief as I can, but the way that you deal with bosses in this game, at least optimized, is very different from how it was in the last two. When they made Planet Robobot, they changed how boss invulnerability works compared to the other games, as is to say, it doesn't exist anymore. In Triple Deluxe and Return to Dreamland, there was boss invul after they got hit a little bit, so you couldn't just wail on them over and over. It's literally not here in Planet Robobot. And this changes a lot of things. You'll be seeing as we go along through the tier list, this is not going to be like the previous two. If you went into the Triple Deluxe tier list video and thought, I could get an idea of it based on Return to Dreamland, there were some changes, of course, but generally speaking, you could get a good idea. Here, that's not going to work. You're going to see a lot of abilities end up in a lot of different places. Not all of them, of course, but still, this is by far, between the three, the most different of the tier lists. Unfortunately, we do have to start off with the bad ones, and I will start by saying that Mirror is... I can't really even, unfortunately, begin to describe just how bad Mirror is here. I don't want to make any Mirror fans too upset, so I'm actually not going to say too much on it. Just understand that this is the only ability so far that has yet to break the 15-minute barrier. Every other ability manages to be under 15 minutes. This is the only one that doesn't, and because it's so slow, and because there's really not much that it can do, and doing the most effective amount of damage with it isn't actually all that easy, the ability winds up being super hard to use, all to get the worst time out of any ability for a run. It's not good. I don't want to stick on this any longer, so we're going to move on. That said, there is one more ability in the bottom tier, just because its time isn't that much better, and it's Sword. I forget where it placed in the Return to Dreamland tier list. I know Triple Deluxe, it was very low, and I think it's about the same as where it was. It might generally be a little bit worse. It has the down thrust, the aerial down B, which you can use over and over again to deal some damage because of how the boss invul stuff works, but it's not very good at it, honestly. And the timing it takes to get used to everything, still rough. Charging the spin attack and all that is not worth it. I mean, it's worth it more compared to Mirror, and as sort of a side benefit, it is easier to use, but still, I can't recommend Sword. All the other abilities, I can at least recommend them if you like them, but I can't recommend these two. They're the bottom of the barrel for sure. Slightly better off, at least better off enough to be in the low tier, we've got Beam. Cycle Beam, which is Beam's dash attack, is our first kind of, sort of, maybe boss killer move that you can just kind of spam over and over again with relative ease and take down bosses. I want to say quickly, but I know that's not true. I'd be lying to you guys if I told you that Beam could take bosses out quick. For what it's worth, I'm not going to get into the final times yet, but it is substantially faster than Sword, which is why I booted it up to the low tier. Although, with all of this being said, you would assume that Beam would be one of the easiest abilities to use, considering you're just using Cycle Beam over and over again. But to get the most amount of damage to it, you actually do have to be pretty close, and you have to do a dash attack repeatedly over and over in order to really maximize the damage. And as it is, the damage is pretty low, so you're gonna have to find a lot of creative scenarios to actually use it. Considering that you can't use it in the air, it's not very good. I can recommend Beam to people who like it barely, but that's about all I can do. Up next, and this, especially for the casuals, won't really surprise anybody, but we've got Wheel. I say this because it is pretty agreed upon by most that Wheel isn't very good for the bosses, but it is really good for the levels. The funny thing about that, of course, being that there are plenty of games where Wheel does really well against the bosses, but this is definitely Wheel's most traditional, I guess that's a good way to put it, go around in a Kirby game. It is good for the levels, it's no jet, but it is very good for the levels, but the bosses, you have the turn jump move, where if you double tap in a direction, Kirby will jump up, and during that turnaround, he's totally invincible and deals respectable damage. And if you keep doing it over and over again, you actually can get very good damage out of it because, say it with me now, the way that boss invulnerability works in this game, when I say it deals really good damage, though, I don't really mean it. It looks like it deals great damage. I guess that's the best way I can actually think to put it. It doesn't actually, at least compared to the competition. Now, the good news is that there is a boss every now and then that it's actually pretty good against. It's not totally useless or anything. Unfortunately, I think it's pretty clear that Wheel is the hardest ability to use out of all of them. And considering you're still getting a bottom 5 time out of this, you can use Wheel's turnaround, kind of like you would do in Amazing Mirror, to deal with some bosses, and it helps to make it easier. It actually is much slower than using the turn jump, so you're kind of stuck in this unfortunate lose-lose, where you're either almost easy but really bad, or super hard and not that great. I'm not the kind of person to lie to you guys, right? This is one of the hardest things that I'm going to have to do for any of these videos, but Parasol is next. This is probably the single most nerfed copy ability from one game to another. The Parasol actually does still have some very good options on the ground. Against some ground bosses, it actually does really good. Kind of about how good it would do in Return to Dreamland, for example. But what made it as good as it was in Triple Deluxe was the D-pad shenanigans, and those are entirely gone here. If there is a boss fight that Parasol has to deal with in the air, it has a slightly better option now that Parasol Swing can count as multiple hits. That's cool. It's slightly buffed, but it just can't keep up anymore. Without what it had in Triple Deluxe, it's not worth using. And while I struggle to really call Parasol a difficult ability to use to deal with grounded bosses, the aerial bosses, that is an entirely different story. It's definitely among the hardest abilities to use in the whole game in that regard, so it ultimately mixes out to be an ability that's overall pretty tricky to use and doesn't really get that good of a time. I will say that Parasol has actually been seeing some pretty good time saves recently, so we might actually be seeing Parasol jump up a tier, since I do rank these based on time. But as it is, I really don't actually see it going up in terms of placements or anything. It is still going to be bottom 5. With Parasol gone, I feel like the floodgates have just totally opened, partially because of how good it was last time, but also partially because of how biased I am towards it. So let's keep the list going, because up next we've got Stone, which I'm not really going to be talking about very much because legitimately the strategy with Stone is just to use Stone Change, the standard B attack, a lot, and then you win. It's funny, actually. It is remarkably similar to the way that you hear a lot of casuals talk about it. Just use Stone and then you win. The big difference here is that obviously because you're going for a faster time, you are constantly having to change out of it, which makes it much harder to use, but again, you are getting a much more efficient ability out of it. Similar to what I was talking about earlier with Wheel, though, it does wind up being a lose-lose, because you either take forever with Stone by not going fast, or you wind up with one of the easiest to explain, but hardest to actually use and practice abilities. For sure, we're at the point now where abilities aren't bad. Stone doesn't really have any impressive times. I mean, you could totally argue that if we weren't just looking at times here, Parasol should be higher because it actually has some pretty respectable times against certain bosses, while Stones are all just okay. But we are looking at times here, and Parasol does have some stinky ones, Stone doesn't really, so the consistency wins the day in the end, which, let's be honest, as it should. So here's one that might surprise you guys if you've seen the Return to Dreamland and the Triple Deluxe list, but Spark is actually pretty solid. And by pretty solid, I do mean decent, but compared to how it's been, this is not bad. It avoids bottom 5. Is that a first? I feel like that's a first. I do have to mention, though, that this is easily, by far, one of the craziest abilities in terms of how it actually works. See, in all the other games, the only thing you could really do was charge it up and shoot it, since that was the most effective way to deal damage. But because bosses no longer have any invulnerability, Spark's charge power, the thing that you get, little barrier, when you rotate the D-pad, that deals damage. So if you can keep that up and consistently hit bosses with it, it does solid damage pretty quick, regardless of where they are on the screen. So long as you can actually go to the boss, it will hit them and it'll deal a lot of damage. Plus, if you need a little extra boost, you can always let go of the charge. And it turns Spark into the ability that I look at before any other when I think Planet Robobot made the boss rushes crazy. Obviously, there are many abilities that are better than it, but just in terms of shock, get the pun, I definitely think Spark is the most notable. Now, I shouldn't have to explain this part, given what I just told you, but easily one of the hardest abilities to make work right, just because of the precision that's required. But if you can get it to work, man, oh man, you're gonna have a fun ability on your hands. Even going into this video, I didn't actually expect Spark to be all that good, so this is kind of a surprise to me, but a very pleasant one. I'm glad that Spark actually made a decent showing in one of these things. Up next, we've got a fairly simple one to counteract all the craziness from before. We've got Whip. Now, the way that Whip works is actually remarkably similar to how Beam worked. You just kind of use the dash attack, the 100 Whip dash, over and over again, and that deals with bosses pretty efficiently. The difference between Whip and Beam is that Whip has a lot of very useful moves. You've got the Ceiling Strike, which is the up B, the Jump Strike, which is the down B, and the Whip Grab, Whip's command grab, that you get by charging. And the dash attack itself is also much faster. So you wind up with an ability that has more options, that deals more damage more quickly. Now, obviously, it isn't a Planet Robobot superstar, but it's yet another example of how the boss invulnerability change the way that the abilities work. In terms of difficulty, while it is pretty one-dimensional, you do wind up using a bunch of different moves for different situations, so I feel like it's a good ability to really get into once you have the basics down. Whip is kind of another favorite of mine, so the fact that it's pretty low is a bummer, but at the very least, we're past the abilities that are not good, right? These abilities are actually okay, and the fact that my absolute favorite was even lower, it could be worse for Whip, let's just say that. Now, if you want an ability that just screams middle of the pack, I don't actually know if it is the absolute middle in terms of the abilities, but if you just want that screams totally average, we've got Fighter. The times that it has are good, but not great. The moves that it has, like the Hadoken and the command grabs, are really good, but they're not fantastic. Overall, it's definitely good, but not great. It's just middle of the road. It just kind of sits there. Even in terms of difficulty, I can't really say that it's all that hard, but because you're going to be firing off a lot of Hadokens and you got to time your command grabs and everything, I can't say that it's easy either. This is, in all senses of the word, a totally middle ability. Now, if you want an example of an ability that kind of also screams middle of the road, but it is, in every sense of the word, better, we're going to talk about Leaf. You're not going to be using too many moves with Leaf. It's just going to be Leaf Uppercut and Leaf Rain. Those two moves, of course, being the up B and the aerial down B. If you watched my Triple Deluxe video, you might be thinking that this all sounds familiar, and that's because it is. Leaf is one of the abilities that didn't really change very much coming into Planet Robobot, which is kind of funny to me considering there are so many abilities that take advantage of the changes that Planet Robobot made. It really just goes to show you how good of an ability Leaf was for this stuff to begin with. You play through the boss rush mode in this game like you're playing the Triple Deluxe boss rush mode, and it still works. I mean, I say Triple Deluxe, but I mean, let's be real here. This is exactly how you also play the Return to Dreamland mode, so overall, not much to say about Leaf, except that it's still good. Oh, and most of the abilities that function like Triple Deluxe abilities in this game aren't really all that difficult, considering the Triple Deluxe strategies are pretty basic. And based on what I was saying before about how it worked in Return to Dreamland, again, very basic, Leaf's not that hard. The last ability in the mid-tier, this one has huge potential to jump up. It just barely missed the cut for the upper mid. We have Fire. This is another ability that really hasn't changed very much since Triple Deluxe. I talked about it a lot in the very, 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 very long Fire Burning Spotlight. All those varies plus the long that I added is really just about an hour, but for a copy ability spotlight, it's very long. But the long and short of it is, it's another one that hasn't really changed since Triple Deluxe. Initially, you might be excited about Fireball Inferno. With the boss invul being gone, you'd assume that Fireball Inferno would just be this constant string of hits. It doesn't actually constantly deal damage. It's only very occasionally that these hits actually come out. Because Planet Robobot is so power-crept, it does struggle to keep up, but like I said in the very, 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 very long Burning Fire Spotlight, Fire is still good, it just struggles to keep up. Not as good as it was in Triple Deluxe, but when is it going to be that good again? Yeah, low for the boss rush modes, I know it wasn't great, but just humor me, okay? Quick little interjection, the second half-ish of the video, my computer stopped picking up the recording, so unfortunately it didn't go through, so if I sound a little different, that's why. These are two separate recordings. What's not separate is this tier list, and up next is Circus. Circus is a little bit of an oddball. It's inconsistent, but its best move is definitely Trampoline into Acrobatics. That is the up B. You can do it twice. After you do the first one, you can time it so that Kirby drops another one. And by far, this deals the most damage out of anything that Circus can do. The problem is kind of that it isn't the fastest option. I can definitely think of plenty of abilities that have faster options, but the damage, it speaks. The numbers speak for themselves, right? It has some other moves like Balloon Pop Art, which is the charge move, and you hold B and just let it charge. Kirby makes some balloon art and it explodes. That's very good for when a boss is coming onto the screen. It's especially good for the mini bosses. The ball balance, which is balls down B, is also really good. Again, just the numbers are insane. It's less spammable than Trampoline into Acrobatics, which is why it's not seen quite as often. Remember that Planet Robobot is all about just the biggest hits as soon as you can get them out. But, I mean, still, the fact that Circus has a bunch of moves that are really good helps it wind up being this good. I wouldn't say it's great or anything, it's still just solidly good, but this is the first good ability that we've talking about so far, right? Everything below this was anything between average to whatever is below average, right? An extra bit of good news for Circus is that, even though there are a bunch of different moves that you can use, it's pretty light on the inputs, which makes it easy to use overall. On the reverse, we've got Bomb, which is up next. Bomb's DPS is actually stronger here than it's pretty much ever been, I kind of want to say. Both Return to Dreamland and Triple Deluxe, it was very good, but the DPS itself is definitely better in this game. If you can get really close to a boss and just keep using Bomb Bowling, which is the dash attack, you will get crazy fast damage, crazy fast. It's very strong, very spammable, and it definitely makes Bomb much better than it was before, but there are some problems. Namely, is that it's not really enough compared to the competition. That's why it is just in the upper mid, where I can describe it as good. It's not great or amazing or anything, but not to sell Bomb short. It is still very good. The other problem, which doesn't really affect its efficiency very much, but it is worth noting, it is very hard to use properly. That's because Bomb's dash attack, the Bomb Bowling, doesn't have any invincibility on it. Unlike most abilities where you can abuse the invincibility to just get a lot of really strong damage really fast, this one you actually need to space properly, you need to time things properly, and you need to make sure that you don't get hit. And bosses in these games are typically rather large, so that does make it a little bit tricky. If you can get past that, Bomb's not too difficult, but actually getting past that point is not easy. Not easy at all. But at the end of the day, Bomb is still a very good ability. Not as good, however, as an ability that I sort of recently did a spotlight for, and that is Poison. The cool thing about Poison is that there are a lot of different things that go into making it as good as it is. There's the fact that all of its attacks have that lingering effect on it. In a game like Planet Robobot, where boss invulnerability doesn't exist, you're not tired of me saying that yet because it's coming a bunch more times. The amount of damage that it can rack up in a very short time is really noteworthy. I can't really single any move out as being the most impressive, only because you do wind up seeing all of the moves a decent enough amount of times. If I had to name one, I guess I would just name the Poison Breath, where you just hold B and he shoots out that air of poison. But in general, all of Poison's attacks are strong, which is sort of a double-edged sword because not only do you have to know which move is best to use at any given moment, which is not the easiest, but also you need to factor in the lingering effect that pretty much all of Poison's attacks leave. Now, that second point, it's more of a warning than anything because, again, I have to stress, Poison is super cool. Seeing all these traps, so to speak, being set for a boss to wander into to get just the right amount of damage you need on them to get something done quickly, it's so satisfying, not only to play, but also to watch. It's not beginner-friendly in the absolute slightest, but if you're up for a challenge, I highly recommend using Poison. On the flip side, Archer has got to be the single easiest ability to use for the true arena in this game. Magic Star Arrow, which is its fully charged shot, not only is super fast, but it's super strong. And aside from not fully charging it sometimes to get some quicker damage if you don't need it to be the fully charged shot, this is the run. There's nothing else to this. It's very simple, but unlike something such as Stone, its strength and especially ease of use make it a very good talking point. There is a lot to say about Archer despite there being so little going on. But, I mean, on that note, let's talk about this. Archer being the easiest ability to use because you really only gotta hold one button. But not only does it have that going for it, but if you're really new to it and you're just getting your feet wet or something, Archer's crouch, I think it's its crouch, but that thing is totally invincible. So if you're not actually used to it yet, you can still use a very efficient strategy here and just use that if you ever really find yourself getting in trouble. Now, again, this isn't some phenomenal ability or anything. It's very, very good, but it's not amazing. But I mean, there's only one ability above it in the upper mid, so that's pretty good. Oh, actually, you know what? Yeah, we're in the top 10. So I mean, an ability this easy, even if it's just barely making it, it's top 10. That's impressive. If you really want to have a good time easily in the True Arena, I definitely recommend using Archer. Definitely makes Planet Robobot's True Arena a better experience. But speaking of things that make Planet Robobot a better experience, up next we have Jet, the best ability in the upper mid. Now, those of you who watched my copy ability spotlight on Jet know how dominant that it is in the main game, but there is a reason why you do lose Jet when you go up against the bosses sometimes. Not to say that it's bad against them or anything by any means, it is actually pretty good, but there's a reason why, again, it's just very good and not great or phenomenal or anything like that. To give credit where credit is due, though, Jet's fully charged rocket forward, or the Jet Dash, as was the case in both of the Superstar games, can be canceled into this little explosion attack. Unlike those games, though, because, say it with me now, the way that Planet Robobot boss invulnerability works, you can actually get both of these hits in against the bosses. And the charge time is generally pretty shorter in Planet Robobot compared to a game like Superstar or Superstar Ultra, so the damage you can deal on bosses actually does pile up pretty quickly. Aside from command grabs and stuff like that, which it's very good, Jet's command grab, because Kirby actually fires it backwards, so it functions more like a projectile than a grab, but still. With that aside, you're really only using the Jet Dash into that explosion, but if you time it right, the damage is very good. I think of Jet in Planet Robobot's True Arena kind of like a rhythm of sorts. If you can get the rhythm down of charge, let go, press, charge, let go, press, you'll be fine. I'm a little mixed. On the one hand, I wouldn't mind seeing Jet be a bit better because I think it's pretty cool. But on the other hand, it's the best ability for the regular game, so I don't know what to say here. We'll just move on to the high tier. How about that? Now we are at the abilities that are great. Starting us off, this actually is probably going to be a very big shock to those who have seen the Return to Dreamland and Triple Deluxe videos. We are taking the ability that was number 2 and number 3 respectively and plopping it at number 8. We've got Ninja. Undeniably, Ninja was an excellent ability for the boss rush in the last 2 games. Just straight up amazing, phenomenal, whatever word you want to use to describe it, that's what it was. Here, it just has to settle for great. Not really much has changed since Triple Deluxe, with one pretty large exception, and that is about its aerial combat. Remember back to Parasol when I was talking about how, while it's still good on the ground, it doesn't really have any more options in the air. Ninja still has very good options in the air, but the attack that it relied on was nerfed from those games. The Ninja Slash, where you held B in front of an opponent, and if you were close enough, Kirby would unleash a shockwave, or however you want to word that. It's still there on the ground, but in the air, it's not there anymore. I guess there's a slim chance that it is still there, but it's just really precise. But if I'm remembering correctly, it isn't there at all. I mean, you still have the command grab, you still got the kunai, the shuriken, or whatever, that Kirby throws from a distance if you need that for any reason. Of course, on the ground, that move, the Ninja Slash that I was talking about earlier, is still incredible, and even in the air, it's not that bad, but you do see the time loss compared to Triple Deluxe and Return to Dreamland when you take that one move away, is somewhat. The only bummer here is that it doesn't make Ninja any easier to use. If anything, it makes it a little trickier, and it was already not easy, but not super hard, so now it's like a little bit tricky. Similar to what we were talking about before, though, a kind of difficult ability is followed up by a very easy one. Number 7, we've got UFO. UFO is kind of an ability that a lot of people tend to forget is in this game, because you can only get it either with an amiibo or with a 100% save file, but you can use it in the True Arena, and it's really good. It was also a bit insulting in a way, because one of its best moves, I mean, the whole thing, its whole kit is good, but one of its best moves is definitely the chain beam, which, you know, you'd think would be good on beam at all, and it's not. But the basic idea with UFO is that you start far away from a boss, you charge up your laser as much as you can, fire it off, and then use charge beam to just deal a lot of damage really, really quick. Like I said before, this makes it one of the easiest abilities to use, but of the easy abilities, I guess this one's the hardest, only because there is a bit of precision that goes into timing everything right. You can easily lose time if you flub something up, but I mean, it's still a UFO. You're still just holding a button, moving close to an opponent, letting go, and then pressing a button over and over again. Overall, great ability. It's got really solid momentum, strong damage, pretty much all you'd want out of an ability. But it's only number 7, so clearly 6 other abilities outclass it. And this ability must have outclassed it by reading someone's mind, because not only is it just like UFO and it's a 3-letter ability, but it's also very easy. Not quite as easy as UFO, but up next we've got ESP. ESP doesn't really have that many moves, right? The one that you're probably thinking of is the normal B, PK Shift, where you can just kind of mash that over and over and over again and get a lot of really good damage. But the tricky part comes from its counter. Yes, ESP has a counter, and it deals crazy good damage to bosses, and that is going to be part of how you deal with bosses most efficiently while using ESP. It makes it kind of deceptive. You look at the footage and you think, oh, this isn't too bad, I can do this, and then you realize, oh, that's actually a little bit tricky if you want to use it most effectively. Of course, if you're just going casually, you stand full screen and deal a bunch of damage that way. But if you're going for efficiency, it's tough, but not the hardest. You know, we're not talking Spark or Wheel or anything like that. We're just talking moderately difficult. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of people watching this video right now that are looking at the list. Hopefully you're enjoying it. But you're thinking, huh, you know, Kirby fan forgot Cutter. That's a little weird. I mean, we already saw Beam, we already saw Sword, but we forgot about Cutter. Where's Cutter? I forget about Cutter. Silly goose. Cutter's next. Cutter in this game is ridiculously cool, and you actually, in the main game speedruns, you actually see a fair amount of times Cutter being taken for bosses. And I mean, for the main game, there's a few reasons. You know, Cutter Dash is a good option for moving around, and Cutter Dash is a pretty good option here. You got some good options in general. Sweep Cutter, which is the move where you hold B in the air and Kirby holds the cutter blade out. Hyper Boomerang, which is the charge move that it has. That's good because it can bounce off walls and stuff. But Cutter Drop, the aerial down B, is absolutely the #1 reason Cutter is so strong in this game. And say it with me now, Boss Invo not being a thing is the reason why. I feel like this ability hasn't reached its full potential quite yet, and that's mostly because in a video like this, you see a person doing a Tash strat, or something that looks like a Tash strat, so you know that it is possible for a person to do this, but it's really hard. I feel like if this ability is really going to soar, going to really get places such as top 3 instead of top 5, this is what's going to need to get done. But even as it is, a pretty solid amount of time ahead of ESP. Again, I don't want to get into time specifics quite yet. That's going to be later in the video towards the end. But even as it is, Cutter in this game, super cool, super fun. But just note that if you're looking at this footage and you're thinking, ooh, I want to try that, it's not easy. It is very tough. All right, I can think of a certain somebody watching this video, they shall not be named just in case they don't want to, but I can think of a certain somebody watching this video that is very upset that I haven't been talking about Doctor. Probably thought that I forgot Doctor. But if you haven't learned anything by what I just said about Cutter, I don't forget about these things. Doctor is #4, and the big reason for that is because of Pharmacy. This is one of Doctor's aerial dash attacks. You heard me right. One of, there's multiple. This one, where if you dash, jump, and hold B, Kirby will shoot out these 3 little pills, and the damage that they deal, it's pretty wild. Now, Kirby's got another aerial dash attack, that being the bandage spin, where if you just tap B, and that's a good move too. I don't want to sell that one too short. There's also Science Lab, which is a down B that has a bit of startup on it, but again, there's plenty of opportunities to actually get the move charged against bosses in this game, so you see it quite a lot. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Pharmacy isn't the reason that Doctor is as good as it is. The damage on this move is just absolutely insane. Bosses go down super quick, and it gives Doctor some phenomenal times against these bosses. I mean, overall, I wouldn't say it's phenomenal. It's really great, but it's still just great. It's not amazing, but it's very great. But it's not the best ability in the high tier. We've got one ability left that is great before we get to the phenomenal ones. I'm sure some of you watching are probably thinking it's a certain ability that we have left, considering that, you know, 2 of them have hammer in them. But one of the ones that have hammer in it is the answer. Probably figured it out just by me saying that, because hammer is the way it is. But up next is the smash ability. I don't want to say too much about this one because we haven't talked about hammer yet, and the reason why smash is as good as it is because hammer is here. So I'm not really going to say anything except that because the hammer here is generally speaking weaker than the hammer that we see with hammer, it does make this ability slightly more difficult to use. Slightly. Again, I'm not trying to sit here and tell you that this is a hard ability, but I can't really talk about it very much because we still got to talk about hammer, which we will at some point in the video. There's only 2 abilities left. So coming from the last 2 videos, you might actually be surprised that hammer is not in the absolute highest echelon by itself, because in those videos, in those tier lists, it was. But here, it does have to share the spotlight with Ice, and I do want to ask this. Between these 2 abilities, hammer and ice, which do you think is better? Before getting any farther in the video, I want you to let me know in the comments, and then when the video is over, you can either edit your comment or reply to it, I don't really care, and tell me if you were right or wrong and what you thought about that. Of course, this is on top of the whole, which ability do you think is the best thing that I always ask? Oh, leave your comment, by the way, and then continue after this point. I'm sure some people, just by the fact that I am hyping it up like this, have figured this out, but #2, and no, I am not kidding you here, is hammer. It is not #1, which is actually insane to think about because hammer got buffed in Planet Robobot. Indirectly buffed, but still. You know that Planet Robobot boss invulnerability thing that I haven't been able to shut my yak about? It helped it. You know Giant Swing, which is not the dash version, but the normal jump into pressing B, Kirby does that swing. Out of a short hop, you can get 2 of those, and as soon as you land, Kirby can cancel the animation into another one. So you can pretty much do Giant Swing on the way up, then do another one on the way down, then as soon as you land, jump and do one on your way up, another on the way down, rinse, repeat. I don't think I need to tell you how much damage this deals, considering that every time you hit a boss, no matter what, they're gonna take max damage. And while I might be making it sound a little bit difficult, I mean, there's really no other way for me to describe it in terms of actually getting the maximum effect out of it. It's really easy. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that it's easier than Archer, but I think I'll sit here and tell you that it's easier than UFO. Like, it's actually not that hard. And, I mean, it is Hammer. You are still going to be seeing Hammer Twirl every now and then. Hammer Flip is way too strong of a move not to use, but Giant Swing really is the majority of what you're going to be seeing when using Hammer in Planet Robobot's True Arena. I ain't here to tell you this in regards to Hammer. I am here to tell you this in regards to the best ability for going through the True Arena with in Planet Robobot Solo, Ice. Now, before I explain anything about Ice, I do want to preface that Ice is easily one of the most difficult abilities to go through the True Arena in Planet Robobot with, so if you're thinking about doing it, after hearing that Ice has somehow usurped Hammer in one of these tier lists, which, I mean, who really saw that coming, right? I wouldn't recommend it unless you're already really well versed in this stuff, then, hey, go for it, right? What do you got to lose? But now we get into the specifics. It's actually remarkably similar to how Hammer works with Giant Swing. Super Ice Sprinkle is Kirby's aerial dash attack. The total lack of boss invulnerability absolutely helps it tear bosses to shreds. So if you're wondering why it's so hard compared to using Giant Swing, the timing is a lot more strict, and also because of the way that Ice works, spacing with its dash is really hard. Now, that being said, Super Ice Sprinkle does have more range on it than Giant Swing, so it does have that going for it, and of course, it does give you better time than Hammer, but it's not that substantial as to say you're skipping an entire phase of a boss fight. You're just getting it done faster. Now you're getting it done faster enough. There is more than a second time save here compared to Hammer, but it is really, really hard, and unless you're trying to go for an Ice-specific world record or something, which, good luck, I would just stick with Hammer or any other ability. But that is it. That is the entire tier list. I feel like this one went on longer than the others have, but if you want to know all the times, I will tell you them from the bottom up. First, we've got Mirror at 15 minutes, 3 seconds, 64 milliseconds. Sword is at 14:54:52. Beam is at 14:33:16. Wheel is at 14:17:41. Parasol, boo-hoo-hoo, is at 14:03:68. Stone is at 13:36:52. Spark is at 13:29:93. Whip is at 13:17:23. Fighter is at 13:16:42. Leaf is at 13:10:49. Fire just barely missed the cut for upper mid at 13 minutes, 0 seconds, 90 milliseconds. Just thought I'd elaborate on that one. Circus is at 12:54:77. Bomb is at 12:54:30. Poison is at 12:49:59. Archer is at 12:48:51. Ooh, top 10 time. Jet is at 12:37:87. Ninja is at 11:51:21. UFO is at 11:44:43. ESP is at 11:41:51. Cutter is at 11:21:34. Doctor is at 11:20:87. Smash is at 11:14:68. And then with, again, the fact that this can exist in Planet Robobot's True Arena is absolutely unbelievable to me. Hammer at 10:59:61 and Ice at 10:58:24. Hammer just barely makes it under 11 minutes, but Ice has about a second and a half to spare. Absolute craziness all across the board. I won't keep the video going on too much longer because, like I said, I feel like this one's going on for a bit much. Thank you, everybody, for your patience with this video. Sorry it took so long. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, ring that notification bell. All of those things really help me out. If you made it to the end and you still haven't commented, let me know how excited you are for Forgotten Land. I've been Kirby Fan, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video. Bye-bye.